Here's a question nobody asks at breakfast, but probably should. What are the odds that you exist? Not in a vague, philosophical, aren't we lucky to be alive kind of way? In a hard, mathematical, physics and probability kind of way? What are the actual chances that you, specifically you, with your particular face and memories and the way you laugh, ever showed up in this universe at all? A fictional Czech professor named Benedict Kuska spent 2 volumes and what must have been the better part of his sanity working out the answer. The answer, he concluded, is essentially 0. Not small. It's not unlikely. 0. And to prove it, he used himself. It begins, as so many impossible things do, with a mistake. During the First World War, a young army surgeon named Kuska was in the middle of an operation when a nurse walked into the room by accident. She had meant to find the first aid station. She had found, instead, a man up to his elbows in someone's insides, who was not pleased to see her. He threw her out. Not gently. His superior heard about it. She was a volunteer, a society girl, not the kind of person you spoke to that way, and gave the surgeon a talking to. Embarrassed, the surgeon tracked the nurse down to apologize. They went for coffee. He noticed her smile. She noticed him noticing. One thing led, in the way of wartime romances, to another. They married, they had a son. That son became Professor Benedict Kuska, author of the very book in which this story appears. Now, what are the odds of that? The nurse walked through the wrong door? If she had known the hospital better, she would have found the right one. The surgeon would never have rejected her, never apologized, never taken her to coffee, never noticed that smile. No marriage, no Benedict. But here's where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean quietly terrifying. The surgeon only happened to be in that operating room in the first place because his colleague, Dr. Popechel, had twisted his ankle. Popechel twisted his ankle because the light in a stairwell wasn't working. The light wasn't working because a fuse had blown. Had the fuse not blown, Popechel would have done the surgery, the nurse would have walked in on him, and Popechel, being a notably more polite man, would not have caused a scene. No scene, no apology, no coffee, no Kuska. So the birth of Professor Benedict Kuska depended in part on the structural integrity of a single electrical fuse during the First World War. But Kuska does not stop there, because of course he doesn't. The surgeon almost didn't marry the nurse at all. He had a fiancée back home, a woman named Marika, chosen by his parents for financial reasons. Marika might well have won out, had she not had a polyp on her vocal cords that made her voice permanently hoarse. She was supposed to have it removed, but the doctor scheduled to do the procedure had lost a fortune gambling, couldn't pay his debts, stole money from the army, instead of shooting himself, the more expected solution for officers of that era, and fled to Italy. Marika never found another doctor she trusted. The polyp stayed. Her voice stayed hoarse. So when the surgeon, sitting in a Russian prisoner of war camp years later, tried to remember the 2 women in his life, one had a voice like warm, clear water, and one sounded like a door that needed oiling. He chose the water. He came home after the war and went straight to the nurse. But even then, it almost didn't work. The nurse had 4 other suitors. The first was a pilot named Baron Hamoras, charming, aristocratic, completely unable to fly because he kept getting hernias from operating the stiff foot pedals of his airplane. The stiffness of those pedals was itself the result of a government contract dispute. The Austro-Hungarian army had chosen an American airplane franchise over a French one. French model had easier pedals. The man who was supposed to tip the vote toward the French model was a general who had a French governess as his mistress and secretly loved all things French, but she was seduced away by an operetta tenor she met while chaperoning children, which only happened because the youngest child was sick with whooping cough and needed to be kept away from the others, which only happened because the cook's acquaintance brought the illness into the house. You see how this goes? The second suitor died of pneumonia after being blasted naked into the snow by a shell while taking a steam bath. He would have survived, Kuska notes precisely, if penicillin had been discovered 30 years earlier than it was. The history of antibiotics thus forms part of the probability distribution of his own birth. The third suitor simply didn't interest the nurse. The fourth was exposed as a fraud because her father got thirsty at a raffle from eating too much paprika in his veal birds, stepped outside for a beer, and ran into an old schoolmate who happened to know everything about the suitor's debts and questionable past. An excess of paprika on a specific afternoon in 1916 saved Professor Cusco's existence. Going deeper, at this point, a reasonable person might say, fine, many coincidences had to line up. That's true of everyone's birth. That's just life. But Cusco is not finished. He is, in fact, barely getting started, because the nurse also needed to be born, and her parents needed to be born, and their parents. And somewhere in that chain, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand needed to be assassinated in Sarajevo, because without the war, the nurse would never have become a nurse, would never have been sent to that particular hospital, would never have walked through that wrong door. And so, the steadiness of a Serbian assassin's hand in 1914 mixed the angle of an archduke's motorcade, the psychology of political violence. These two are factors in the probability of Cusco's birth. He traces the chain further, back to Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, back to a gypsy grandmother in 1798, who was convinced by an uncle who had fought in Napoleon's army to marry outside her religion, which only happened because that uncle had been forcibly conscripted by a French cavalry patrol while delivering sheepskin coats to Italy on behalf of his master, a sheep farmer. Had the sheep farmer not raised sheep, or not found a market for coats in Italy, or not sent that particular uncle, the patrol would not have seized him. He would not have marched across Europe. He would not have returned with liberal views about intermarriage. The grandmother would not have married who she married. A chain of consequences too long to trace would ultimately have resulted in one thing: no Professor Cusco. But Cusco goes further still, much further. The mammoths about 350,000 years ago, in what is now Prague, a prehistoric hominid female was being chased through the forest by a male. She was running fast. She tripped on the root of a eucalyptus tree. That encounter produced offspring. Those offspring carried certain genes. Those genes were passed down through 30,000 generations, mixing and recombining, till they surfaced in the right configuration on the face of a young nurse in 1914, giving her a smile faintly reminiscent of the Mona Lisa. That smile is what the surgeon noticed over the operating table. That smile is why he took her for coffee. The eucalyptus trees in that location existed because herds of mammoths, fleeing from saber-toothed tigers, had eaten eucalyptus flowers and then drunk from the vault of a river, which at the time had been sulfurized by underground gases, which gave the mammoths violent diarrhea, and the seeds in their droppings planted the grove. The river was sulfurized because of a geological shift in the Tatra Mountains caused by an earthquake in the Dinaric Alps. That earthquake was triggered by a meteor. The meteor arrived from a specific swarm of debris in space, 2.5 million years before the birth of Christ. Had that meteor landed slightly to the left, there would be no sulfur in the river. No mammoth diarrhea, no eucalyptus grove, no tripping hominid, no Mona Lisa smile, no coffee date, no marriage, no Cusco. The point, and here is where Professor Cusco drives his argument home like a nail through the floor of reality. Physics tells us that events with a probability of 1 in n centillion are not just unlikely, they are, for all practical purposes, impossible. The entire lifespan of the universe, measured in seconds, is shorter than a centillion. You would have to wait longer than the universe will exist to expect such an event even once. Cusco shows step by step that the odds of any specific person being born, traced back far enough, are far smaller than 1 in a centillion. Far, far smaller. And this is before you even account for the microscopic question of which sperm meets which egg on which specific night. His own mother, he notes, conceived a child 1.5 years before he was born. That child was his sister. His sister is not him. It's a different night, a different person. Add that to the reckoning, and the numbers become numbers that don't have names yet. Conclusion. From the standpoint of physics, every living person is a thermodynamic miracle, not metaphorically. Literally, your existence is less probable than water spontaneously freezing on a hot stove. Physics says that shouldn't happen. Physics says you shouldn't happen, and yet here you are. The rebuttal, a critic named Professor Verschliska read all of this and said, more or less, yes, but so what? His argument is sharp. Behind Cusco's labyrinthine probability calculations, he says, is actually just one simple question dressed up in mathematics. Why am I me and not someone else? Why was I born now, in this body, in this time, rather than as one of the billions who came before or will come after? That, says Verschliska, is not a physics question. Physics doesn't experience being a self, doesn't know what it feels like from the inside. It can describe your genes, your neurons, your chemistry, but it cannot explain why you are the one looking out through your eyes rather than someone else. That question lives outside physics entirely. So Kuska hasn't disproven probability theory. It's just rediscovered in a spectacular and roundabout way. It's one of the oldest mysteries of consciousness. The sheer, stubborn, inexplicable fact of being this particular someone. The narrator of this whole review, the man who read both volumes and is reporting back to us, admits he has no idea who is right. He has come away from the experience genuinely unsure whether Kuska made a brilliant point or a very elaborate mistake. What he has come away with is an extremely detailed knowledge of the events that led to the birth of one fictional professor. The fuse, the ankle, the polyp, the governess, the tenor, the whooping cough, the paprika, the prisoner of war camp, the gypsy grandmother, the sheepskin coats, the mammoths, the meteor, and perhaps that is the real lesson. Not a proof, not a theorem, but a feeling. The dizzying, vertiginous sensation you get when you follow any life far enough backward and realize that it hangs always on a thread too thin to see. The next time someone says you were meant to be here, you can smile and nod. But you'll know the truth is stranger and more wonderful than that. You weren't meant to be here at all. And yet, against all odds that physics can calculate, here you are.